Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining the weekly Greater Manchester briefing. Apologies for the slight delay in starting. Today's briefing will be in two parts. Firstly, we will take you through the normal case data. So really pleased to be joined by Sir Richard Lees and the co-chair of our LEP, Lou Cordwell, who will also make comments about Greater Manchester, the case for Greater Manchester moving all or in part to Tier 2 as we move towards the tiering decision next week. So we will start with the health situation and its links to the economy. And then the second part of today's briefing will be on the report from Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary on recording of crime, and the Deputy Mayor, Baroness Beverly Hughes, and I will take you through that and our response to that and your questions. So without further ado, let's get on with part one, and I will hand you over to Sir Richard Lees to take you through the data. Richard.
Apologies, I'll start again. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to try and go through the slides relatively quickly because they are now following a pattern that should be familiar over the last couple of weeks, but they do have, I think, particular significance at the moment in that next week we do expect both a review and decisions about which tier different areas will be in. I think the timetable for that is that the review will take place on the 16th, so we'll be using data that is current then rather than the data we're showing you now. So the trends are really important from that point of view. Announcement on the 17th, and if there is a change, for that to be implemented on the 19th. The first table shows the rate of positive cases per 100,000 population. Again, for the whole of Greater Manchester, it continues to show a significant decline. That's replicated in 9 of the 10 districts. You will see that Bury has gone slightly in the other way. That is because of a small number of coincidental outbreaks and does not at the moment represent a reversal of trend. The trend is still down there. If we could move to the next one, please. This is the heat map. And for those with good memories what the heat map looked last week, we had a blip with Rochdale in the 65 pluses. You will now see that the blip has disappeared, and pretty much across the piece we are seeing downward trends in all age groups, but that older age group, the 65 plus age group, particularly important because that's where the hospital cases of the future are most likely to come from. It's actually just a 65 plus. I think the median age, for example, in MFT at the moment is 78. And it's an indication that age is really important as far as hospitalisation is concerned. Next one. This is pillar 2 testing. Don't think yet it includes any lateral flow testing, and if lateral flow tests were in, the numbers would probably be better, because I think out of the first 10,000 students that have gone through the process, there's only about 30 positive cases being identified, but even so, the positivity rate does continue to go down. Next one, please. Care home residents. Again, with slight concern a week ago because we did have an upward trend. We're now back with a downward trend. That figure really the lowest we can see in this table over the past 7 days. Just a quick word about visits to care homes. I think we have reported concerns about ensuring that visits to care homes can take place, but they do take place safely. This is a concern that's been raised by directors of public health, by directors of adult social services, and by those people running care homes themselves. We are putting arrangements in place in order to allow safe visits to care homes. It will involve, of course, appropriate PPE for the visits, but the key bit is the testing. And what we're going to do is put in place arrangements that visitors will get a PCR test 3 days before they visit. They will then get a lateral flow test on the day of the visit, and assuming both of those are negative, then the visit will be able to go ahead. The reason we're doing it in that way is that the sensitivity of the PCR test operates over a lot longer period of days than the lateral flow test. The lateral flow test is very accurate for a relatively short period of time when, in fact, the infection or the virus is at its highest. And by doing it in this way, that we can be certain that the follow-up lateral flow test is, if there is going to be any sign of infection, it is when it is at its highest sensitivity. Can we move on? This is what's happening in our hospitals. Again, you will see that admissions have gone down, that inpatient diagnoses have gone down, number of ITU beds have gone down, and a significant fall in the number of beds occupied by COVID-19 patients. Again, repeat that this is affected by the length of stay, because mortality rates are down. The average length of stay is over 3 weeks now, but I think all of that is beginning to feed through, and we are seeing a significant decline in the number of beds. We're not saying that hospitals are out of the woods, but certainly the pressure that we certainly saw 3 weeks ago is most definitely not in the system anymore. Moving on. This is a comparison. We did this comparison for the first time last week, and it's a comparison with London and with Liverpool City Region. What their figures said at the decision point around the tiers compared to what Greater Manchester's numbers are now. And you will see, I think, within those numbers very, very clearly that the Greater Manchester numbers suggest that we are now in a position to be able to move into tier 2, very clearly to move into tier 2, and the expectation is that in a week's time that those figures will be better still, because we still see that our rate is falling rather than rising. We do know that London's rate is now rising, but it's worth saying that Liverpool City Region's rate has continued to fall over the last couple of weeks that they've been in tier 2. So London obviously has circumstances that are not prevalent in the northwest. I think Andy will say a little bit more about this, but we will be pressing very hard for the whole of Greater Manchester to be in tier 2. But there are some slight differences across the city region, which you've seen in the previous table. And as a follow-up, we'll be arguing that although we think the whole of Greater Manchester should be in tier 2, there are certainly clusters of local authorities within the city region that have an almost overwhelming case to be in tier 2 now. And that's reflected in hospital pressures as well. Is that the last one now? I think it is. The only other comment I would make is around vaccinations. Clearly vaccinations have started in the city region. Monday will be moving into phase 2, so the number of locations will increase, both hospitals and primary care networks. Clearly, we haven't got any real data around vaccinations yet, but in the next few weeks, we ought to be able to start adding in vaccination data to what we're able to present. And I think, yeah, that pretty much covers everything I want to say, Andy.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Richard. Another improving picture, which is great to see. Of course, all of this is creating a lot of uncertainty for business across the city region. So we're really pleased today that the co-chair of the Greater Manchester LEP, Local Employment Partnership, has joined us. So I'm now going to hand over to Luke Cordwell, who will give you an update on where business is with regard to the current situation. So I'll hand over to you, Luke.
Thanks, Andy. So as Andy says, I'm going to set some economic background, I guess, to the review next week. And, you know, it comes as no surprise that we remain hugely concerned by the scale of the impact to our local economy to date, and we fear worse still to come. So we've seen a doubling of universal credit claimants to over 100,000 people, and the Greater Manchester economy potentially has contracted by 15% up to November. We've got some worrying forecasts, including potentially another 100,000 people becoming unemployed in Greater Manchester in the first half of next year. Worse if we get a no-deal Brexit. And overall, the sentiment amongst businesses that they are desperate to get back to trading and will invest in and comply with COVID secure measures. However, you know, the state, as you would expect, is nuanced around this. So just to highlight some key points really from our perspective, we know that key to this is stability and confidence. It's incredibly important to business that they get some confidence that if they invest in COVID secure measures, if they buy stock, that they're going to be allowed to trade. So a clear medium term glide path out of the restrictions rather than the flip-flopping in and out of restrictions is really vital for us. And, you know, there are clear risks to, you know, this kind of stability that come from further spikes or further lockdowns. So we're very aware of that. For a lot of businesses, they're incredibly focused on trying to get some stable trading throughout January. And really the mantra is as much as we can open safely. That's really where we're going to be focused. So for some of those businesses, it may be more important that they're able to trade consistently through January than simply a mid-December change. And also, we know the tier restrictions are not the only reason for some of the lower levels of confidence. You know, the public is nervous about returning to normal behaviours, about returning to normal expenditures. The hospitality sector and its supply chain has, as we know, been particularly affected. High levels of redundancies, and wet-led pubs are closed in both tier 2 and tier 3. So we know that we're looking at an impact on food-led hospitality. And for many, you know, the reduction in restrictions on the 19th may be too late, but for many, they're saying that they would like to trade as much as they possibly can over the coming days. So the key points we'd like to emphasise really in terms of where to focus, it's vital that we have adequate support for any business in whatever tier we're in that's not able to retrade, and it's really important that we keep emphasising the importance of getting that package of support right. The communication of that is incredibly important, so again, people have as much visibility and ability to plan their businesses as possible. It's really important that COVID secure is not just about the business, but also the public spaces, the public transport that surround that, again, to give us the best runway we can in January. But overall, it's vital that we maximise our economic activity across Greater Manchester, whatever tier we find ourselves in. So just like the health data, the picture for business is really equally nuanced. Some hospitality businesses won't have time to prepare and reopen. Others would be really happy to be given the option to trade as much as they can over the festive period, even if it's for a few days only. So really, we want business to have the option where the data says it's safe to do so, that should they be allowed to reopen, they can do. But equally, you know, we don't want to risk the situation. So we're really very happy to be data driven by these decisions. So we understand there is an enthusiasm to talk about tier 2, tier 3, and that's incredibly important in the next few weeks. But more important are also the long-term certainty and confidence. So we really want to continue that focus as we move into January. So many of those things are beyond our control, but we do have a couple of elements that are in control that we do want to just emphasise. One is urging people to shop in Greater Manchester where they can. You know, this is a huge consumer spending period. Every penny that people can spend supporting businesses across GM by spending, whether it's a takeaway or it's a Christmas present, that will make a huge difference. And where hospitality can reopen, we really do encourage people to go out for a meal and enjoy themselves and support local business. And for business and for business to business procurement, again, procure in a Greater Manchester way where you can, because that makes a massive support mechanism for the businesses that have had a really difficult year. But the counter to that is, of course, we ask people to stick to the rules, to be careful in order to give us the best chance of economic recovery as we move into 2021. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much, Lou, and thanks again to Richard. So just in summary, we've obviously heard about the uncertainty facing business, but we've also heard more positively about the improving picture from Richard. So it's clear to me that Greater Manchester has a case to move into Tier 2, and a strong case when you look at particular parts of Greater Manchester on the slide that Richard showed. In terms of the comparison with London and Liverpool at the tiering decision when they both went into Tier 2 on headline case rates in all groups, we are lower than both and lower than Liverpool on the over 60s. And of course, you've seen today that hospital pressure has decreased somewhat since that time as well. So we will be making that case to government over the next couple of days. We have been informed that there will be a silver and gold meeting next Tuesday, with then decisions taken on tiering on Wednesday, announced Thursday. So this is obviously now a matter of focus within central. We would ask, as well as the government looking at the health data, that they also give that wider consideration that it was reported was given to London when the original tiering decision was made. This is a critical time for the economy, particularly the city centre economy. And the point I think needs to be made that if you were to keep cities, particularly a city like Manchester, in Tier 3 over the holiday period, it does have the effect, if hospitality is closed, of creating an incentive for people to have more informal gatherings in the home. And we keep being told that that is the main cause of spread of the virus. So particularly through the New Year period, we would ask the government to give consideration as to whether that makes sense. The data says we have a good case for Tier 2, particularly in certain areas. And if you think about the New Year period, to have hospitality closed, I think might present greater challenges to Greater Manchester Police and gatherings that possibly could create more spread of the virus. So we're looking to the government for an evidence-based, balanced, wide consideration of Greater Manchester's position, taking into account that people here have been living under restrictions now for a number of months. The picture has improved consistently over recent weeks, and we will certainly now be asking for it to be given the fullest consideration as the government make their decisions. Ross, I will leave it there, and I will hand back to you to take us through health or other related questions before we move on to part 2.
Thanks very much, Andy. And we've only got one question at the moment on about tiers and this part of the press conference. So if colleagues do want to ask questions of Sir Richard, Andy and Lou, please do submit these questions now and we'll get to them. The first question is to Lou from Nigel Barlow about Manchester. It's about hospitality, and are you concerned that after 9 months of restrictions that it won't be simply a case of people returning to normal behaviour, that the 2020 will have seen a seismic shift in the way that people want to go out and spend their money?
Thanks for that, Nigel. I mean, the reality is we'll only know when it happens, won't we? But I think the evidence seems to show us that largely, you know, people are at a point where for their own mental well-being, they want to get back to some kind of normality and to seeing other people and to socializing in a COVID friendly way. So I think, you know, we do expect, I guess, you know, if there is a significant concern around consumer spending, we probably will see that reflected in the amount that people are spending post Christmas period. But largely, I think what we're seeing is a desperation for business to return to as much normality as it can. And actually, you know, people desperate to not just be holed up in their houses anymore, but actually return to some kind of normal work or normal social life, you know. So I think yeah, we're hopeful really that demand is there, you know, albeit people wanting to be reassured that whatever activity they're doing is safe.
Thanks. Andy or Richard, did you want to come in on this one? Andy?
I think go to Richard, Ross, given that.
I think, as far as I'm concerned, Lou's answered that pretty fully, so I've got nothing to add.
Thanks.
Are there any more?
I think there are a couple coming on this. Yep, just had one in there. So Kevin Fitzpatrick at Radio Manchester about tiers. Rochdale's leader Alan Brett said yesterday that he's wary about going into tier 2 too soon, as it would be worse to go down than back up. What's your view, Andy? We'll go to you first on that one, and then we go to Sir Richard.
Yes, so thanks, Kevin. I was certainly alluding to the fact that the position is different in different parts of Greater Manchester. If you aggregate the figures, I think there is a clear case. But within those aggregated figures, you've got boroughs in quite different positions and leaders in different positions. So I understand what Alan is saying about his wariness. That said, there is consistent improvement. It's why I believe there is a case to look at Greater Manchester in the clusters of boroughs where people sort of naturally will travel around. I think there's a natural travel geography in the southern part of Greater Manchester, the boroughs Stockport, Trafford, Salford, Manchester, and then a similar travel geography in the north. I think it does make sense to consider boroughs in that way. But overall, as we've said, there is a sign that Greater Manchester as a whole is in a position where it could be considered for tier 2. So those final discussions will be had with leaders, Kevin, in the next couple of days. We will put in our considered position to the government later this week or very early next week, and then of course the government will make their decisions. But you know, if we look at the position that we're in today and we consider other areas that have been put into tier 2, then we can have well, on the evidence, confidence that that Greater Manchester has a very strong case.
I'll bring in Richard on that one as well.
Well, I can understand anybody's wariness, although I think if we're going to be wary, it's the 5-day relaxation over Christmas that is a bigger cause for concern, and it means we have to keep repeating the message over and over and over again, that if we want to have our freedoms back, if we want to be able to do these things, that whilst COVID-19 is still around, and it's very much still around, we have to operate those freedoms in a responsible way. So we need to keep high standards of hygiene, we need to keep socially distancing, we need to wear masks on public transport, we need to get those messages over if we want to be able to go out for a meal, if we want to be able to go for a drink, to have a cup of coffee in a cafe, then we have to behave sensibly. And I just can't repeat that message often enough. Really, so I hope very much we'll be in tier 2, but then that all of us will behave in such a way that keeps us not only in tier 2 but keeps moving us towards tier 1.
Thanks very much, Richard. A question from Jennifer Williams at the MEN. We'll go to you first on this one, Andy. On the position you outlined regarding the tiers, are all the council leaders and Labour MPs happy with the idea of 2 different clusters of tiers?
Thanks, Jen. I don't know about the MPs. That you would have to, I think, go to the MPs, but the leaders have discussed this with great care, obviously learning from the position that we went through in the summer. I think it's fair to say that everyone would prefer Greater Manchester to move as one. I mean, that's a general view shared across the leaders. However, the question arises, can that be done, given the difference between the borough with the lowest number of cases and the highest? There is quite a difference between the two. So in those circumstances, the question then comes, is it right to sort of say to businesses where the cases are lowest that they have to stay shut because cases in a different part of the city region are much higher? And the general view of the leaders has been that, you know, we shouldn't now hold back parts of the Greater Manchester economy, given what Lou has just told us, that, you know, it's been a really tough year and many are now saying they just need to get trading again. So, you know, the consideration changes as we go through this this process. I think there is a general feeling now that we need to free up businesses to trade where they can safely, crucial word, safely be freed up to trade. I think what everybody would want to avoid is a return to the piecemeal patchwork process of release from restrictions that we saw last summer. I don't think anybody thinks that that is a sensible way to go. If there is to be a differential position in Greater Manchester, I think it needs to be over clusters of boroughs, as Sir Richard and I have said, kind of dealing with natural travel areas, you know, the footprint on which people live their lives across perhaps a small number of boroughs, and, you know, those areas are kind of well understood in parts of Greater Manchester. So I think that's where the position is at the moment. Our first preference would be to move as one, and as Richard has said today, there is a case to move as one when you look at the aggregated figures for the city region. But I think we do have to recognise that the aggregated numbers conceal a fairly wide range between top and bottom, and consequently there is a case for a separate discussion with the government then about well, either in whole or in part release from Tier 3, and that's the conversation that will take place over the coming days.
Thanks. I'll bring Sir Richard in on that question as well.
Well, I'm interested, Jen, that you've used the word happy in the question. Can I just put on record that I'm as miserable today as I was yesterday? So I don't think this is about happiness. It is about doing the best we can for people's jobs and the businesses that employ them in Greater Manchester. And I think that's the discussion we've been having. The ideal position, the one that is the best position, is that we have a single Greater Manchester solution. And for me, that's most definitely all of us being in tier 2. But if that's not possible to achieve, then we go to what might be the next best thing to support as many jobs and businesses in Greater Manchester as we can.
Thanks, Andy. I think we'll come to the end of this section. So
okay.
I was going to offer Lou or Richard any final comments before we moved on. Lou, did you have any kind of final remarks you'd like to make before we end this section?
No, I think other than just to kind of reiterate the point that really everybody's keen to get to a more positive situation where, as much as we can trade safely, we do so, and so I think you know, our ask would be that that's considered as we move into the decision making, which is obviously a critical decision making period for us as a Greater Manchester economy next week.
Thanks, Richard. Did you have any final comments?
Well, I think the only comment I would make, and this is on the basis of Lou being here as co-chair of the LEP, but we've had lots and lots of dialogue with businesses. Businesses are very active in Greater Manchester at the moment. And the point is that this is not the mayor, the 10 leaders, the combined authority and the councils doing their own thing. We are very much working in partnership with our health and care colleagues, obviously, but also with our businesses in Greater Manchester as well. And it is great to have them organised and working with us because they share that interest of getting people back to work.
Thanks, Andy. I'll hand back to you.
Just to say thanks to Richard and Lou for joining us. And as Richard said, this is a united front. You know, we've had a tough year. We've been in restrictions coming up for 5 months, and I think we're looking to the government to give us a bit of hope and to reward the good people of Greater Manchester who have followed the restrictions, helped bring the cases down, relieved pressure on the NHS. You know, this is a improving story finally, and I think it's important that the evidence that we've presented today is recognised. So Ross, I'll leave it there, and I think we will move on to the HMIC report. So just to thank Richard and Lou for attending, and if I may turn to that issue. So today, of course, we've had the report from Her Majesty Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary on the service provided to victims of crime by Greater Manchester Police. It's a report that contains some serious findings that need urgent attention. I will respond myself in a moment, but just to take you through the main response to the report, I'm going to hand you over to Deputy Mayor Baroness Beverly Hughes. Bev.
Thank you very much, Andy. Well, the report we're talking about today presents a very serious and a very worrying picture. And I want to start by saying that the standards of performance that it reveals are totally unacceptable, and they have to improve radically and fast. The report has shone a light on the kind of level of day-to-day practice that actually we can't normally see. And it's through an inspection and the forensic ability to follow a case through from first presentation and a report by a member of the public through to what happens to that case, whether it becomes a recorded crime, and if so, how it's investigated. And it's that ability to see the whole process from start to finish on a case basis that the inspectorate has been able to do. And that is why I really welcome this report, because it gives us an insight that we can't otherwise get. We expect, and the public has a right to expect, that the police will protect the public. And actually that's what the vast majority of police officers want to do. But this report makes clear that GMP is falling significantly short in that regard. On the positives, I'm pleased that the inspectors do acknowledge significant improvements have been made since the last inspection in areas that were identified then, particularly in the recording and investigation of rape and sexual offences. And they also acknowledge the things that in the management of cases that GMP is doing well. It's identifying cases, it's allocating resources appropriately, it's using some new ways of helping the public, using appointments very creatively, and that's all very, very welcome. But overall, the findings in relation to recording and the investigation, particularly of violent crime, and within that, particularly of domestic abuse, stalking and harassment, and coercion and control, are a real cause for concern. Before the report was published, I met with the key inspector. I wanted to raise some issues with her about the methodology. I had some queries, but I assured her in that meeting that after she considered the points that I was making, whatever she said in the final report, I would accept without reservation. And I repeat that now. I accept these findings and all the recommendations of the inspectorate without reservation. The need for improvement in recording, of course, was not unknown to GMP. There has been for some time a strategic plan in place to deal with these issues, requiring some very significant changes, and that was being implemented. However, I think the report makes it very clear that that did not go far enough, and it did not go fast enough. There were some key impediments to that progress. One was the fact that in order to implement some of the changes that they saw that were necessary, we actually needed a level of information technology capability that GMP did not have. And that is why there was a priority to bring in a new computer system. That ultimately will be transformational, but it's been delayed and it had problems in the first 6 months of its institution. And that meant that some of the changes that depended on the functionality that that new computer system would bring could not be brought into being within the timescale that was originally intended. So the IOP system was instituted in July 19. There were problems that needed resolving for 5 to 6 months. That took us to January, February, and then the pandemic arose. The pandemic also had implications for the implementation of some of this work. Planned recruitment of new people for the call handling section and the training of those people planned for the spring had to be put on hold because that could not be done during the lockdown. However, you know, these are fairly recent things, and this problem is long-standing. I think the findings that the inspectors are reporting, you know, collectively are very serious. They have said too, as I am saying now, that the pace of change needs to increase. They've identified that about 20% of the calls to the non-urgent helpline are not being answered. There are some issues that mitigate that because there are online mechanisms for contacting the police, and you know, some of those people will have accessed those. Nonetheless, they're not identifying victims as vulnerable at the earliest opportunity, failing to identify, record and investigate about a quarter of the reports of violent crimes and to safeguard victims properly, and poor documentation throughout, which is a real worry, because there may well be things that police officers are doing to protect victims, but unless that's really documented robustly, then actually, you know, we can't say that that is the case. And I think that the issue of supervision, it not being effective by senior officers on the districts, and the lack of training, both for officers themselves and for those supervisors. And I think, you know, the issues that get to me most, I think, are the fact that victims themselves were not being consulted properly about what's happening in their cases. And in a number of instances, many instances, cases were being closed on the grounds that the victim was not supporting continuation or was withdrawing their support, without the evidence being recorded as to what the victim was actually saying. So we cannot be sure that those cases were closed properly. As I say, GMP have been instituting mechanisms to address these issues. On the 1st of July, they instituted, delayed, but this was part of the planned strategy for change. They instituted a centralised unit that progressively over time will handle all the decisions about what incidents that come into the police should be recorded as crimes. The first tranche of cases that have come into that unit from July through to September have shown a dramatic increase in the recording of crime. 18% for domestic abuse, 30% for stalking and harassment, and 33% increase for coercion and control. So I think that gives me some optimism that that is the right approach. And it will take some time before all cases across the districts of all levels of seriousness can come into that centralised unit. But clearly, as we move in that direction, that's going to make a big improvement. So, you know, there we are. We are requiring, and they have produced for me, a detailed action plan that addresses the inspector's findings and recommendations. We have met to discuss that. I will have regular weekly meetings with the Chief Constable to review their progress against that plan, and it will be carefully monitored by me and senior people in my team in the combined authority. I think the Mayor himself as well will be involving himself on a regular basis in the review of the implementation of that action plan. The inspectorate themselves are going to return in 6 months' time, and again I welcome that because it will give me an independent view of the progress that's being made. It's very, very important. We take it very, very seriously, and we will do all we can to address this. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed, Bev. And I just want to say my own comments with respect to the reports and follow on from what Bev said. It's a report that many people in Greater Manchester will find worrying, and I think the relevant point is the point made that these are not new failures. They're serious failures, but not new. Obviously, the Inspectorate has identified these issues over a number of years, and while there has been some improvement, it is not enough, and that needs to be said, and said clearly. It isn't good enough. Of course, the longer term plan that Bev referred to is producing now some results, and there has been the improvement from July to September. I think it is fair to say that the period in question when this report undertook its field work was obviously April to June, which was not a normal time. There has been the impact on recruitment caused by the pandemic and the delay in the computer system. However, I don't want to come onto this briefing and give excuses for Greater Manchester Police. It's the Deputy Mayor's job and my job to hold them to account on behalf of the public of Greater Manchester. And that is what we have done and will continue to do. We're quite clear that it isn't good enough, that immediate improvement is now required. The Deputy Mayor has just explained the process that has been put in place to ensure that the improvement that we have seen over more recent months is sustained. A weekly review by the Deputy Mayor, and I will review it monthly too. And we will ensure that the action plan that Greater Manchester Police have developed delivers for the public in Greater Manchester and gives confidence to the public, particularly to people who have been victims of crime, that their reports of crime will be properly investigated and recorded. And so I'll just finish before opening up to questions, Ross, in saying that, you know, this isn't what we expect. It isn't good enough. While there are some areas of improvement, Bev's touched on a number. I think the 101 service has shown some improvement. Overall, we need to see much more, and we will ensure that that happens by holding Greater Manchester Police to account for that. And I would just want to say on their behalf, on behalf of Greater Manchester Police, I would want to say sorry to all of those victims of crime who have found that the service has not been good enough. We owe it to them to improve matters, and we will do it fast. Ross, I'm going to hand back to you to take us through the questions.
Thanks. The first question I'm going to take is from Jennifer Williams at the MEN. It's directed at you, Andy. The inspector has suggested leadership is at the heart of the failings she identified, and that view is replicated amongst many MPs, officials, councillors and police officers that she's spoken to. Do you agree? And do you still have confidence in the Chief Constable? Secondly, given that policing falls under your remit, to what extent do you yourself feel accountable for these failures when the force has now been warned about this specific issue 3 times under your mayoralty?
So thanks very much, Jen. These are, as I said, serious issues, and they are the responsibility to be sorted out by the leadership of Greater Manchester Police. There's no getting away from it. They are serious issues which they must take responsibility for and deliver a plan to see the improvements. Now, to be fair, there is improvement. Bev has just spoken about that, but it has to be sustained, and that is why we are putting in place the process that we are. I just want to make a point then about my role and the Deputy Mayor's role. Our role, of course, is to hold Greater Manchester Police to account. So we are not making operational policing decisions. Greater Manchester Police is independent. It makes its own decisions. What we must do is hold them to account where we are presented with evidence that shows the service to the public is not good enough, and in this case, the service to victims of crime. And that is what we have done and will do. As the Deputy Mayor said, you know, this full picture has been presented to us by the HMIC's investigation, and we are immediately acting upon it. But we've also held them to account on other issues, such as the force's handling of child sexual exploitation, the implementation of the IOPS computer program. There are other areas too. So my responsibility is to hold them to account on behalf of the public of Greater Manchester, and every time where we've been presented with issues that need to be addressed, that is what both I and the Deputy Mayor do and will continue to do.
Thanks, Andy. Bev, would you like to come in on that one? Sorry, Bev, you're on mute.
I think Andy said everything that needs to be said. I'll just say that, you know, we do find that I find this really, really disappointing report. It's a hard report to read, and, you know, I regard my responsibility, and I know the Mayor feels the same. My responsibility is not to the Chief Constable or GMP. My responsibility is to the people of Greater Manchester, and that is why this report is so hard to read, because it's quite clear that many of those people have been let down. I don't think for a minute those police officers would have done that consciously, but collectively as an organisation, they have failed a lot of people, and we cannot and will not let that go unaddressed.
Thank you, Bev. There's a question from Tasha at Granada Reports. With regards to the Inspectorate of Constabulary report, how does the Mayor respond to the view that GMP's performance has continued to deteriorate since he took responsibility? What pledge do you make to the public today? Is the Chief Constable's position tenable? What do you understand GMP's long-term plan to be? And is it right that the force has not put anyone in leadership forward for questioning by journalists? And in brackets, they've just released a lengthy statement. Andy, if you want to take that one first, I'll hand over to Bev.
Oh, thank you, Tasha. I mean, obviously, you will have to put the views about how they handle this to Greater Manchester Police. Deputy Mayor and I are giving our interviews today because it's our responsibility to hold them to account, and that is what we are doing. With regard to the question of Greater Manchester Police's performance since I took responsibility as Police and Crime Commissioner overall. The main issue, of course, that the public have been raising with us is police numbers and police visibility in communities. So let me give you the latest figures on police officers in Greater Manchester. When I came in March 2017, just before, there were 6,430 police officers in Greater Manchester. The latest figures for November this year are 7,109, so an increase of 679, and that has allowed us to increase visibility and commit to a named officer and a named community support officer for every ward in Greater Manchester. And beyond that, I think there have been improvements, falls in recorded crime, in serious crime, and an improvement, as I say, in the 101 service, which was a priority that I asked them to address at the point I came into office. So I don't think you can say, you know, just take this report as evidence that overall Greater Manchester Police's performance has deteriorated. I don't think the figures back that up. You could say it's a more mixed picture, but on the things that matter most to the public, I can demonstrate significant progress. And you have to bear in mind, of course, that like other police forces around the country, the cuts had gone too far at that point in time. I think that's now recognised by the government, and hence the recruitment programme the government have put in place. Those cuts were having consequences on frontline policing, and the Deputy Mayor and I have set about steadily repairing that damage, and many of the numbers that I've just referred to were funded by decisions which we took to increase the police precept on the council tax. So those are local decisions to stop the frontline reductions and begin recruiting again, and you can now see the benefits of that in the figures that I gave out. So the pledge I make to the public is to keep police visibility high in terms of that commitment to a named officer and PCSO in every locality. We are both committing today to hold Greater Manchester Police to account for improvements on the services that they provide to victims of crime. It clearly isn't where it should be, and we are saying that we will ensure that the improvements we've seen in more recent months are sustained and put on a long-term basis. I think the leadership of Greater Manchester Police does have to accept responsibility to bring about the improvements that we need to see. And as I say, matters of media handling are a matter for Greater Manchester Police, but I am answering your questions today because I think it's extremely important. I hold Greater Manchester Police to account, and in return, behind that, the public hold me to account for doing that job, and the Deputy Mayor as well. And we are out here doing our job. We have made it clear the time frame that we want to see the improvements made by, and we will make sure that they happen.
Thanks, Andy. Bev, I'll go across to you on this one as well.
Thank you. Well, I'd just like to say a couple of things on this question. In terms of GMP's alleged performance deteriorating overall, that isn't the case. There are some areas of work in which Greater Manchester Police excel. They've been rated by the Inspectorate as outstanding for tackling serious and organised crime in all its forms, and that includes drugs and firearms, and sex offenders. There's some groundbreaking work in identifying and tackling sex offenders, child sexual exploitation. Cyber-enabled crime is another area of great strength, and that's affecting more and more people across Greater Manchester all the time. Modern slavery and human trafficking as well. There's some really excellent work going on there. We don't often hear about those things, but they are areas of strength in terms of policing and protecting the public. So I think we just, despite the seriousness of this, taken in the round, there's some really important strengths that Greater Manchester Police have got in protecting the public from some really pernicious and deadly crimes, actually. On the leadership and so on, I think, I wish that the Chief Constable had come out today and spoken. As Andy said, that is a matter for him to answer, although if he's not appearing, I appreciate it's difficult for you to put that question to him. Nonetheless, from my point of view, it's important that although, as the Mayor has said, we don't manage the police service, we hold them to account. But it was important for both of us that the people of Greater Manchester heard from the Mayor and I today, and that's why we wanted to come and speak.
Thanks, Andy. Just back to you on this one as well.
Thanks, Ross. I just wanted to reinforce what Bev was saying. I would ask people to look at policing in the round. Obviously, this is a serious report that's identified failings on a crucial area, services to victims of crime. But I think it is important to recognise the improvements that Bev has mentioned and the huge change that they have been bringing through, which is the IOPS system. Now, many of the failings that HMIC have been identifying are linked to that change, and Greater Manchester Police have been criticised for bringing that change in, which is difficult because obviously it was that is needed to pave the way for much better services, and those are beginning to come through. So, while it is our job to hold them to account, it is also our job to support them in the difficult job that they do and to recognise where they are improving services to the public. 101, I think, has improved. Been disrupted to a degree by the pandemic, but the report talks about the number of calls that are going online. We would say that's actually a service improvement to the public because people have that option now. If they're struggling to get through on 101, calls can be diverted to the live chat function, and that is actually an enhancement in service to the public, and we think also is helping improve 101 overall. So I think it is important just to keep some balance here, Ross, and that's why I just wanted to reinforce and echo the points that Bev made.
Thanks, Andy. Michael Gaffney's got a question for you and then a separate question for Bev. So I'll put a question to you first, Andy. This was obviously written before I think you'd finished your comments. So one word that's missing from GMP's response is sorry. Don't people who reported crimes in good faith only to drop off the system deserve an apology? And as I say, I think it was before you made that.
Well, my style, Michael, is always to, be direct and face things up. And if things haven't been good enough, you say sorry to people. So, on behalf of GMP and Greater Manchester, if you like, I am saying sorry to people where the service that they were given fell short of what it should be. So I'm not shying away at all. Indeed, it would be wrong for me to sort of talk around that or hedge that. If things aren't good enough, say sorry, face it up, and commit to improve it, and that's what we're doing today.
Thanks, Bev. Another question for you specifically from Michael at Heart and Smooth. We know that you're personally very passionate about tackling domestic abuse. Do you personally feel undermined by the findings on how these offences have been mishandled and the consequences for things like Clare's Law disclosures?
Thank you, Michael. Yes, I am passionate about domestic abuse and other sexual crimes, particularly against women, but against whomsoever they occur, because I know how utterly damaging they are. So I don't feel undermined personally, because I still have that passion, and I'm still determined, to make sure we do the very best that we can for people who are affected by those crimes. And I also am very aware that within Greater Manchester Police, there are some equally passionate officers, senior officers, who are trying to take this work forward. And what I see here, which I'm really going to try and look at and address, is some kind of mismatch, really, between that commitment and that passion for people specialising in this area of work in the police, and what happens on the ground when an individual officer gets a case, and how that is either recorded as a crime or not, and if it is recorded as a crime, how well it's investigated. There's definitely a mismatch there between the expertise and the commitment at one level in GMP and what is happening with some cases when they reach the district level and being handled by a non-specialist officer. I think as well there's an issue of capacity here, because unfortunately domestic abuse is a volume crime in Greater Manchester. There are nearly 4,000 reports to the police every single month, over 40,000 cases every year, and that creates a tremendous demand that is actually genuinely very hard to meet. We have to meet it, there's no excuse for not meeting it, but it's just to put that context before you to explain the enormous amount of demand that those cases make. But you rightly point in terms of Clare's Law to some of the other consequences of these crimes not being recorded, because it means that you can't, according to Clare's Law, inform people then when there's been a case in the neighbourhood. Equally, as the inspector's report makes clear, if a crime's not been recorded, then if something happens again and that same person calls into the call handling centre because of a repeated incident, there's no record of the previous incident, so you don't get the full picture of repeated victimisation either, and that's another serious implication of this.
Thanks very much, Bev. We've got a question from Pat Hurst from PA. In June 2019, the Chief Constable was given a new 2-year contract. The Deputy Mayor said Ian Hopkins had been outstanding. In the following 12 months, GMP lost 80,000 reported crimes. Have either of you spoken to the Chief Constable about the report? What did you say? And what will happen in 6 months if progress has not been made? Bev, put that one to you first. You're on mute, Bev, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, up to that point, the Mayor and I had no issue at all about renewing the Chief Constable's contract and making those comments. Clearly, this is an issue that he is responsible for and must deal with. Yes, I have spoken to him about the report. I've had more than one meeting since I've talked to the Chief Inspector before the report was published with both the Chief Constable and the Deputy Chief Constable, and we've made it clear, you know, what we feel about the situation that the report has revealed. I mean, they feel the same. I mean, they obviously very much regret what the inspectors have found. And we'll monitor progress really carefully. As we've said, we expect to see substantial progress within the next 3 to 6 months. And, you know, if we don't get that progress, then we'll have to see where we are.
Thanks, Bev. I'll bring Andy in on this one as well.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Pat. So yes, both Deputy Mayor and I have spoken to the Chief Constable about the report, and what we've said today is obviously what we feel about it. Just to say something about the leadership that Ian Hopkins has provided, I think again it's important to see things in the round. Obviously, today there are issues that need to be addressed and gripped quickly. But let's also look at the other issues that we've faced, the big difficult issues. So since I came into office, no bigger than the attack at the Manchester Arena. His leadership was outstanding, and throughout that period, indeed, so was the force in the way that they prosecuted the investigation leading to the conviction, and in more recent days, the admittance of culpability. So, you know, I think when we look at what has happened, I think it is important to bear everything in mind that the force has been dealing with in recent times. It has done some things really well. In other areas, it hasn't come up to the mark, and this is a clear example of that today. And where that happens, it's our job to not pull our punches, but to tell it straight on behalf of the public, to hold them to account, to require the improvement plan, and that is what we're doing today.
Thanks, Andy. I'll take this as the final question, just given the time. I'll put it to Bev first, and Bev can get any other final comments, and then I'll put it to Andy. It's a question from Rob at Channel 4 News. There have been critical reports since 2019. Ian Hopkins has been Chief Constable throughout that time. Does he still have your full confidence that he can oversee the changes, given the failures, to make significant improvements over 4 years?
Thank you, Rob. Well, I think he's certainly capable of making the necessary changes. He has to demonstrate that he can do so. As the Mayor has just said, there have been many aspects of his work as Chief Constable and the work of GMP more generally that have been outstanding, and you know, perhaps the response to the Arena attack is the most obvious example, but I could go through more in terms of my more detailed knowledge of their day-to-day work, and I went through some of them previously. What I would say though is that those examples of very, very good practice or even outstanding practice cannot cancel out serious failings like this. I'm afraid that, you know, there has to be outstanding practice as far as we can get it on all fronts. And these are very serious issues that we're talking about today, because they affect some of the most vulnerable people in our communities who go to the police because of serious incidents that have occurred to them. And they have to be able to expect, you know, a full response and every assistance from the police, both in protecting them and bringing the perpetrators of any violence towards them to justice. So, you know, there has to be excellence on this front as well.
Thanks, Bev. Andy, I'll bring you in this one, and if you've got any final comments as well before we finish.
Thank you, Ross, and thank you, Rob, for your question. So what I would say is services to victims of crime are at the heart of policing. The trust that all police services need come from supporting those victims of crime and to do it properly all of the time. So in no way can these failures in the report today be minimised. The question of confidence then arises from whether or not Greater Manchester Police have a credible plan to improve on the issues that have been identified over a number of years now by HMIC. And they do have a long-term plan. The issue is, of course, it was linked to a major change in the way their internal systems operate, the IOPS system, which is known to many of you who've followed the ups and downs. So, you know, the step change and improvement is obviously linked to changing the way the people who are taking down details of crime are able to enter those into the system. And what we have seen is improvements coming through in the last few months, but those are only early signs, and I wouldn't want to put undue weight upon them to say everything is fine, because it's too early to say that. So the answer to your question, Rob, is whether or not the plan that has been developed actually now delivers. That will determine whether or not we have confidence in that plan to address the failings in this report. And time will tell. But what we are putting in place is a system of monitoring that will allow us to be clear whether or not that plan is working. This hasn't been a normal year. I think it's fair to say to Greater Manchester Police, you know, they've been dealing with lots of other things, as have all people working in public services. It's not been the easiest of times. Other priorities have come in. That said, it doesn't excuse the fact that these are basics and these need to be done, whatever is done properly, whatever is happening. So that is the situation. And the issue is now, can we see sustained improvements now we finally have the new operating system in place? And we will be monitoring that closely, working towards the 6-month review with the HMIC, and we will expect significant improvements by that time. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance today and for your questions.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, F2 and Ross.